biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I want to go back to the exchange between Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, on House Judiciary, and Bob Mueller. This was one of the first exchanges once you started getting into the 5-minute allotments for each member of the committee. And this was the exchange that gave us the revelation that Bob Mueller was apparently unfamiliar with Fusion GPS.
Director Mueller, can you state with confidence that the Steele dossier was not part of Russia's disinformation campaign?
No, as I said in my opening statement, that part of the building of the case predated me, and by at least 10 months.
Yeah, I mean, Paul Manafort's alleged crimes regarding tax evasion predated you. You had no problem charging them. And matter of fact, this Steele dossier predated the Attorney General, and he didn't have any problem answering the question. When Senator Cornyn asked the Attorney General the exact question I asked you, Director, the Attorney General said, and I'm quoting, "No, I can't state that with confidence." And that's one of the areas I'm reviewing. I'm concerned about it, and I don't think it's entirely speculative. Now, if something is not entirely speculative, then it must have some factual basis, but you identify no factual basis regarding the dossier or the possibility that it was part of the Russia disinformation campaign. Now, Christopher Steele's reporting is referenced in your report. Steele reported to the FBI that senior Russian foreign ministry figures, along with other Russians, told him that there was, and I'm quoting from the Steele dossier, extensive evidence of conspiracy between the Trump campaign team and the Kremlin. So here's my question. Did Russians really tell that to Christopher Steele, or did he just make it all up and was he lying to the FBI?
Let me back up a second, if I could, and say, as I said earlier, with regard to the Steele, that's beyond my purview.
No, it is exactly your purview, Director Mueller, and here's why. Only one of two things is possible, right? Either Steele made this whole thing up and there were never any Russians telling him of this vast criminal conspiracy that you didn't find, or Russians lied to Steele. Now, if Russians were lying to Steele to undermine our confidence in our duly elected president, that would seem to be precisely your purview, because you stated in your opening that the organizing principle was to fully and thoroughly investigate Russia's interference. But you weren't interested in whether or not Russians were interfering through Christopher Steele. And if Steele was lying, then you should have charged him with lying like you charged a variety of other people. But you say nothing about this in your report.
Yeah, that's a problem I find. And in addition to that problem is, and not knowing who Fusion GPS was, Glenn Simpson, the principal of GPS, has meetings with the Veselnitskaya, the Russian lawyer who was central to the Trump Tower meeting, on both days opposite the day of the Trump Tower meeting. The day before the meeting, the day after the meeting. So Glenn Simpson commissions Christopher Steele for the Steele dossier used to get the FISA warrant on Carter Page. Christopher Steele, is that part of the Russian disinformation campaign or not? A.G. Barr says, I don't know. It may have been. Mueller says that's beyond my scope. Why is it beyond your scope? You're investigating Russia meddling in the 2016 election. And how do you not know and take interest in Glenn Simpson at Fusion GPS meeting with the Russian lawyer that you spent 14 pages documenting with respect to her meeting with Donald Trump Jr. and Trump campaign people? That's just one of the problems that Mueller has in explaining the nature and substance of his judgment calls and those calls as memorialized in that report. The other problem he had was explaining any of it, just generally. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Kevin Brock. He's a former assistant director of intelligence for the FBI and principal deputy director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He is a founder and principal of New Street Global Solutions, which consults with private companies and public safety agencies on strategic mission technologies. Kevin, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Kevin?
Do we have Kevin?
Hello, Kevin.
Oh, there we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you. Thanks, Kevin.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries. So I guess give us your view of Mueller's, the quality of Mueller's testimony, generally speaking, but then specifically, this is a question a lot of people have, and I don't think we got any closer to an acceptable answer yesterday. If, as was his top line yesterday, concern about preventing foreign nationals from interfering and undermining the integrity of our elections, then why do you take no interest in the other campaign that was running concurrent to the campaign you investigated in 2016?
Yeah, that is a giant gap in this whole proceeding. It's disturbing. The the problem that the underlying problem that Bob Mueller did not address is the fact that the mandate he received from the acting attorney general back on May the 19th, 2017, was to examine all Russian attempts to interfere with the presidential election. There's no way he can get around that. That statement is clearly in the letter authored by Rod Rosenstein. He cannot say that it was the purview of some other federal agency to look at that. It was exactly his purview. It doesn't matter if the IG is looking at it or John Durham now is looking at it. It was exactly his remit to examine any and all efforts by the Russian government to take these for these intelligence efforts. So, and the fact that Glenn Simpson did leverage contacts with a foreign intelligence agent, meaning Christopher Steele, who then relied on his contacts inside the Russian government, which were fed information, obviously, from Russian intelligence, should have been something he looked at closely. And you can sense the frustration on the questionnaires of certain members of Congress in this regard, and they deserved an answer, and we, as the American people, deserved an answer to why the special counsel chose not to look at that.
Well, I mean, it was a very frustrating day because Robert Mueller, I mean, he was halting. He seemed unsure of himself. It was uncomfortable to watch. What was it like for you to see it?
Yeah, it was not the Bob Mueller that we remember. And in fairness, and I'd like to say, I pointed this out in an article that I wrote, that I was with Bob Mueller on 9/11. He had been FBI director for exactly 1 week. He was steady. He was competent. He inspired confidence in those of us who were in the FBI, even though we didn't really know him that well.
Mm-hmm.
He displayed leadership traits that I admired on that day, and he didn't come across as the same Bob Mueller that we knew, and whom I retain a lot of professional respect and regard for. Watching him yesterday was painful. I got the same reaction from a lot of my former colleagues. It's not how we remember him. He came across as ill-prepared and hesitant and unconfident, and frankly unfamiliar with his own report.
Right.
Right, which
And
makes
that
me
did
think
damage
it's not his
to.
report.
Well, but the problem is
His aides
the
wrote it.
the problem is it undermines his credibility, and if you have the investigator does not come across as credible, then you start to question everything with respect to the work product, and so that's the problem. Mueller and to some extent Democrats who are trying to sort of leverage the Mueller report, a cherry picked version of it, of course, to
Right.
advance impeachment.
No, it undermines the trust that he has built up over a magnificent career, and which was touted during his selection as special counsel.
With respect to, well, just one more point on Mueller. I mean, there's a lot of people sort of alluding to, Bob Mueller is not as mentally acute as he once was. That happens to people as they get into their 70s. It's just describing reality. It's not taking a cheap shot, and
Right.
maybe that's why one of the reasons he didn't want to testify. And boy, it seems like Democrats sort of threw caution to the wind because it seems like a lot of people knew that you weren't going to get a Bob Mueller that some people perhaps remember when he was testifying before Congress a decade ago.
It's a mystery to me, frankly, why he ever accepted this role as special counsel,
Yeah.
and then afterwards why he agreed testify before Congress. It was a no-win situation. He should have recognized, as former director of the FBI, that it was a house of cards. It was built on a flimsy foundation. The original premise of the whole investigation was based on an FBI counterintelligence investigation, which I am confident is going to be shown, that was initiated based on inadequate predication. He should have recognized that there was really no there. So why even take on the assignment? But he's a patriot, and he probably felt that it was important for him to do so. But I think he'll rue the day that he ever accepted the assignment.
What about the FBI's reputation? I mean, you had Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. We know what they did, that they were politically motivated, some think, in those text messages. Do you think that the FBI will get their reputation back?
I hope so. Damage was obviously done, but I like to point out that this really wasn't the FBI. It was 4 or 5 individuals at the very top of the FBI who insulated themselves from the rest of the FBI and carried out an investigation that was highly unusual, was not, as I mentioned before, adequately predicated. They didn't allow this investigation to be carried on where all other investigations are carried on, out in field offices where you have years and years of expertise and familiarity with Attorney General guidelines and everything else that didn't seem to be deployed in this instance. So I placed the blame squarely at the feet of James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, whom they relied on inordinately in many ways, and a handful of others, James Baker, that made terrible decisions and ended up damaging the Bureau.
Yeah, and I don't think the damage the Bureau has incurred is over yet either. Obviously, we have the IG report pending as well as the Durham investigation. But Jim Comey was on MSNBC the day before Mueller's testimony. He was on Tuesday, and he was focused again on the Trump Tower meeting. Even though, I mean, it's weird to me. Jim Comey and other partisans, including the House Democrats, focusing on the Trump Tower meeting, still trying to breathe life into the criminal conspiracy piece of this that Mueller did find conclusively didn't exist. It's bizarre. But in addition to that, Comey said of the investigation being done by the AG's office with U.S. Attorney Durham at point, I welcome the investigation of the investigators that's going on. He welcomes it. He said it in an op-ed in Washington Post. He repeated it on Tuesday. Does he really welcome it? Should he welcome it?
No, he shouldn't. And I'll tell you why. From every indication, it looks as though the Trump campaign was targeted by a number of individuals who had confidential source relationships with either the CIA, the FBI, or some other Western intelligence organization. In other words, individuals who are used to being confidential sources of these organizations were somehow unleashed against 2 new members of the Trump campaign, George Papadopoulos and Carter Page, and this without any formal investigation in place against the campaign. This flies in the face of the Attorney General guidelines and every other policy protocol that's been put in place to safeguard American citizens from overreach by the government. And so there's a lot of explaining is going to have to be done as to why this happened. In one case, and this was actually after an investigation was launched, but without it looks like adequate policy authority, they placed a government employee next to George Papadopoulos in an undercover role. Not even an FBI employee, some government employee in an undercover role targeting George Papadopoulos. This is all going to have to be explained. The decision makers behind these activities are going to have to be confronted and exposed, and hopefully we'll get some idea as to why these activities were take place when in fact it looks like they shouldn't have.
He is Kevin Brock, former Assistant Director of Intelligence for the FBI and Principal